Somewhere beneath the mountains of the Western Caucasus, there is a hole in the ground that swallows rope, light, and time. Cavers have spent more than 50 years trying to reach the bottom of it. And even now, after descending more than 2 kilometers into solid rock, nobody has found the end. This is Veryovkina Cave, the deepest known point on the surface of the earth that a human being can walk, crawl, and dive into. And the strange part is not that it's deep. The strange part is that after half a century of trying, it is still not fully explored, and it may never be. Before we get into why this cave refuses to give up its secrets, it helps to understand how a hole like this even forms in the first place. Caves like Veryovkina exist because of a slow, patient chemical process called karst formation. Rainwater picks up a small amount of carbon dioxide as it falls and moves through soil, which makes it very slightly acidic. Over hundreds of thousands of years, that faintly acidic water seeps into cracks in limestone rock and slowly dissolves it, widening tiny fractures into passages and passages into shafts. The Arabica Massif is made almost entirely of thick limestone, which is exactly why this small patch of mountains in the Western Caucasus contains not just one, but several of the deepest caves ever documented on the planet. The rock itself has been quietly hollowing itself out for millions of years, and cavers are simply the first living things trying to follow that process all the way down. To understand why exploring it is so difficult, you have to picture what deep actually means here. Veryovkina Cave descends more than 2,200 meters below its entrance, roughly 7,250 feet down. Stack the Burj Khalifa, the tallest building on the planet, on top of itself 2.5 times, and you would still not reach the bottom of this cave. It sits high in the Arabica Massif, part of the Gagra mountain range, at an elevation over 2,200 meters above sea level in the disputed region of Abkhazia on Georgia's Black Sea coast. From the surface, the entrance looks almost unremarkable. A crack in the limestone, about 3 meters by 4, easy to miss if you didn't know exactly where to look. What waits underneath that crack is one of the most hostile environments explorers have ever tried to map. The cave was first noticed by cavers from Krasnoyarsk in 1968. They climbed down about 115 meters before the passage got too difficult and they turned back. For decades after that, Veryovkina sat mostly forgotten, just one of thousands of sinkholes scattered across the Arabica Massif. Soviet speleologists were busy chasing a different cave nearby, one that would eventually become world famous in its own right. Nobody suspected that the modest opening, later named after cave diver Alexander Veryovkin, who died exploring a flooded passage in a different cave system in 1983, was hiding a path down to the deepest place ever reached by a human on dry land. Everything changed between 2016 and 2018. Russian caving teams returned to the site with modern rope techniques, portable underground camps, and years of accumulated knowledge about how to survive at extreme depth. Expedition by expedition, they pushed the known depth from under 2,000 meters to over 2,200. In doing so, they dethroned Krubera Cave, a neighboring system in the same mountain range that had held the title of deepest cave on Earth since 2001, when Ukrainian speleologists first announced they had passed 1,700 meters. Krubera would go on to become the first cave in history confirmed beyond the 2-kilometer mark, a milestone that took Ukrainian cavers 14 days of continuous descent just to reach. For over a decade, Krubera was the benchmark every extreme caver measured themselves against. Then Veryovkina took the crown, and it has held it ever since, though the two caves remain separated by less than 50 meters of vertical depth, an almost unbelievably close margin after 50 years of exploration. What's easy to miss in that timeline is just how incremental this progress really was. Nobody walked in and mapped 2 kilometers in a single trip. Krubera's exploration alone stretched across decades, starting with Ukrainian speleologists in the early 1980s who spent years working through the upper sections before the deeper shafts were even attempted. Each new expedition added a little more, sometimes only 100 meters, sometimes less, and every meter had to be surveyed, rigged with permanent rope anchors, and mapped by hand before anyone could call it confirmed depth. Veryovkina followed the same pattern once cavers returned to it in force. A push in February of 2017 got the known depth past 1,800 meters. By that August, it had jumped past 2,200. Later expeditions pushed the survey even further, revealing more than 6,000 meters of side passages branching off below the 2,100 meter mark, an entire hidden network still being mapped piece by piece. This is not a cave that was discovered. It is a cave that is still being discovered, one expedition at a time, and there is no guarantee the current known bottom is anywhere close to the real one. So why, with modern equipment, satellite mapping, and everything else the 21st century offers, is this cave still not fully explored? Start with the descent itself. This is not a single drop. It is a vertical maze of pits, shafts, and narrow meanders, stacked on top of each other, connected by squeezes barely wide enough for a human body wearing full caving gear. Every meter down has to be rigged by hand, rope anchored to rope, using a technique called single rope technique, where cavers descend and ascend the same line using mechanical devices instead of ladders. There is no elevator. There is no shortcut. Every single meter of that 2-kilometer plunge has to be climbed, both down and back up, by a human body carrying its own gear. Then there is the water. Starting at around 800 meters down, underground tributaries begin cutting into the main shaft, and from that point on, cavers are constantly wet. The humidity inside the cave sits at 100%. The temperature hovers between 4 and 7 degrees Celsius, cold enough that hypothermia becomes a real threat if a caver stays still for too long, yet the environment is also physically exhausting enough that overheating inside a wetsuit is a genuine risk during hard climbing sections. Cavers have to constantly manage that balance layer by layer for days at a time, thousands of meters from daylight. And then there are the sumps. These are sections of passage completely filled with water, floor to ceiling, sometimes for dozens of meters at a stretch. To get past a sump, a caver has to switch from climbing gear to cave diving gear, submerge completely, and swim through freezing, pitch-black water with no visibility, no ability to surface for air, and a real chance of getting a line or a piece of equipment snagged on rock in a passage, sometimes barely wider than their shoulders. Cave diving is already considered one of the most dangerous activities in the world above ground. Doing it at the very bottom of the deepest cave on Earth, after already spending days descending through cold and exhaustion, multiplies that danger by an order most people can't fully imagine. None of this happens in a single trip down and back up. A full expedition to the bottom of Veryovkina Cave can take several weeks from start to finish. Cavers set up a series of underground camps at different depths, essentially small tent shelters, wedged into wider sections of passage, stocked in advance with food, fuel for portable stoves, dry clothing, and batteries. Teams leapfrog each other, some resting at a camp while others push further down, then swap roles on the way back. Communication with the surface is nothing like a phone call. Many expeditions still rely on hardwired telephone cables strung down through the cave alongside the rope, because radio signals simply do not travel through that much solid rock. If that cable breaks, and it sometimes does, the surface team can lose contact with cavers who are still a full day or more of climbing away from daylight. Add to that the simple exhaustion of hauling gear through squeezes tight enough to require removing a backpack and pushing it ahead by hand, and it becomes clear why so few people in the world are qualified or willing to attempt this kind of expedition at all. This is also why rescue is close to impossible. If someone is injured near the bottom of Veryovkina Cave, there is no fast way to reach them and no fast way to bring them out. Every meter that took a fit rested caver an hour to descend on the way down can take many times longer to haul an injured person back up. Rescue operations from deep caves have historically taken days, sometimes involving dozens of volunteer cavers relaying gear and manpower through a chain of underground camps. In 2021, the body of a solo caver who had attempted an unsupported descent was found at 1,100 meters, a grim reminder that even experienced explorers can be lost long before reaching anywhere near the known bottom of the system. If you're finding this as fascinating as I do, this is exactly the kind of place science is still racing to understand. So if you want more deep dives like this one, hit subscribe now, because what's waiting at the bottom of this cave is stranger than most people realize, and we're about to get into it. Despite everything working against them, cavers keep going back, and one of the biggest reasons is what they find down there. Life exists in Veryovkina and Krubera at depths that seem almost impossible to support anything alive. Rare blind shrimp have been found in underground pools far from any sunlight. Pale cave scorpions move through passages that have never seen daylight in their existence. In Krubera, researchers discovered a species of springtail, a tiny insect-like creature, living at nearly 2,000 meters underground, one of the deepest confirmed points any terrestrial animal has ever been found living naturally. These ecosystems run entirely on nutrients washed down from the surface or produced by microorganisms adapted to total darkness. And every expedition that reaches new territory has the chance of finding species that have never been documented anywhere else on the planet. There's also a stranger, more personal side effect of this environment that has nothing to do with what lives in the cave and everything to do with what happens to the people inside it. Total darkness and isolation over many days can start to disconnect a person's internal sense of time. Without sunrise or sunset to anchor the body's natural rhythm, cavers on long expeditions have reported losing track of whether it's day or night on the surface, sometimes drifting onto a sleep and wake cycle that no longer matches a normal 24-hour clock at all. Combine that with cold physical exhaustion and the constant low-level stress of technical climbing, and a multi-week expedition into a cave like this becomes as much a psychological test as a physical one. That's part of what keeps this competition alive. Veryovkina and Krubera aren't just neighbors, they're rivals, sitting in the same limestone massif, both plunging past the 2-kilometer mark, separated by a margin so small that a handful of new meters discovered in either cave could flip the record again. Cavers have gone back year after year, specifically trying to push one deeper than the other, squeezing through passages nobody had entered before, diving sumps nobody had dived, all in pursuit of a few more meters of officially surveyed depth. But here's the thing that makes this cave genuinely different from something like climbing a mountain. When you climb a mountain, you can usually see the summit. You know roughly what you're working toward. In a cave like Veryovkina, you don't know where the bottom is until you're standing on it. And sometimes not even then, because a caver can hit a sump, a flooded dead end, and have no way of knowing whether that sump leads to more passage beyond it or simply ends the cave completely. To answer that question, someone has to dive it, and if the dive fails or the passage beyond turns out to be too dangerous, the true bottom of the cave may remain unknown indefinitely. There's also the matter of time and access. The Veryovkina Massif sits at high elevation, which means the caving season is short, often limited to a few months a year when the weather makes travel to and around the entrance possible at all. Add to that the political reality of the region. Abkhazia is a breakaway territory, internationally recognized as part of Georgia, but functionally controlled with support from Russia, and that status has complicated international access for decades. Expeditions require permissions, logistics, and funding that can take years to arrange, and the pool of cavers willing and technically capable of attempting a 2-kilometer descent through freezing sumps is small to begin with. Scientists sometimes compare this kind of exploration to spaceflight, and it's not just a dramatic metaphor. A deep cave expedition to the bottom of Veryovkina can take multiple weeks, with cavers living in underground camps at different depths, carrying in their own food, fuel, and communication lines, and slowly working their way down and back exactly the way astronauts train for and execute a long mission, with no ability to simply turn around and walk home if something goes wrong. In some ways, we understand more about the surface of the moon than we do about what's sitting in the rock beneath our own feet. And unlike orbit, there's no theoretical ceiling stopping us from going even deeper. Researchers point to the old Soviet Kola super deep borehole, a scientific drilling project that reached over 12,000 meters underground, as proof that open space and flowing water can exist far past where any known cave currently goes. If that's true, there could be sections of passage in these mountains that no one has ever set foot in, simply because no one has found a way through yet. That search hasn't stopped. As recently as this year, expeditions have been pushing into other cave systems entirely, including a major push into Mexico's Cheve Cave, where teams are trying to determine whether it might eventually surpass Veryovkina altogether. Cheve is a completely different kind of challenge. Instead of one continuous shaft, it's a sprawling network of interconnected passages spread across a huge area of mountainous jungle terrain, and cavers suspect there may be an entrance somewhere on the mountain that connects directly into a much deeper section of the system than anything reached so far. Finding that entrance, if it even exists, could take years of surface surveying alone, long before anyone even starts the underground work. The competition to find the true deepest point reachable underground is still very much alive, and every year brings new attempts, new dives, and occasionally a few more meters added to the map. What makes all of this genuinely open-ended is that nobody actually knows what the true limit is. Unlike climbing, where the summit of a mountain is a fixed visible point, nobody can say for certain how far down these limestone systems actually go before they either run out of open space or become too flooded and too narrow for a human body to physically pass through. Every meter of new depth discovered in the last decade has come from cavers willing to dive one more sump, squeeze through one more crawl space, and rig one more rope pitch into the dark, simply to find out what's on the other side. So the next time someone tells you that we've explored every corner of this planet, remember this: there is a hole in the mountains of the Caucasus that people have been trying to fully map for more than 50 years, using ropes, dive gear, and sheer physical endurance. And we still don't know exactly where it ends. It might genuinely take another advance in equipment, or another decade of expeditions, or discovery in a completely different mountain range before anyone can say for certain how deep the deepest cave on Earth actually goes. If this kind of exploration blows your mind as much as it does mine, subscribe and turn on notifications so you don't miss the next deep dive into the strangest, most extreme places on our planet. And if you made it this far, drop a comment and let me know. Would you ever attempt a descent like this? Or is this one adventure you'd rather leave to the professionals? Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.